Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and once again, welcome back to the Wilds beta. Now we're in the open beta and everyone's jumping in. It's time to talk about the big bad for this playtest, and that is of course the Apex Predator. This is Rey Dau, a fantastic thunder wyvern with incredible visuals, music, sound effects, and of course his very own nest that enhances that lightning. But with him being the Apex and a 5-star, and us being in limited gear sets and the basic hope weapons, completely lacking on proper armor skills, it is a challenge. So how does this monster work? What do you need to look out for? What can you do to make this fight way easier? That's this video, so let's get started. How do you hunt Rey? Well, he appears during your main hunt with doshaguma during the Sandtide. At the beginning of it in particular, starting out around area 13, those sandy dunes. Now don't worry, he will stay for a good while during the Sandtide, and even after in the time of plenty, where he will eventually leave. If you defeat Rey when he shows up, you'll unlock the optional quest to hunt him specifically, without then having to wait around for him to show up. So if you want to force that, consider just joining a listed quest maybe in your lobby for Rey Dau. Ideally you'll join one that's midway through, so you can get to the fast finish and unlock the optional quest like that. Personally, that's exactly what I did the first time, so I could go on to list my own quest and hunt him whenever I want. What should you bring and prep in regards to Rey Dau? Well, of course you're going to want nullberries because he generates thunderblight, which will lead to stuns. By eating nullberries, you kind of mitigate the buildup of that and ultimately avoid being stunned. Other options are going to be things like flash pods, because just like any flying wyvern, you can fire those into the air and that will knock them out of the air, leaving them exposed for a while for some free DPS. And that's particularly relevant, say, during enrages where things are very dangerous. The other two things to consider might be, say, burst pods, which you can pick up throughout the hunt and fire at him to interrupt him briefly. I would also recommend lure pods because you can drag him to the caves where you find chatacabra, because there's multiple boulder drops there. So make sure you're stocked up on all of these things. If you just go to the item box in one of the tents, you can choose that menu and pull from the massive selection of stuff in the main supply that they give us. I believe they started with 1,000 nullberries, so get those into a loadout so you always have them. Don't go running around picking them up. In regards to equipment, I recommend the Master Mounter skill. This is a group skill and will require you to wear 3 pieces of the balahara set. So that's exactly what I do, around a couple other pieces for their skills like the stamina surge skills. Of course you want to wear whatever enhances your damage the most, but I do think mounting is really impactful in Rey Dau's fight, so that's what I run. In regards to the locations you'll be fighting Rey Dau, you'll be in those open dunes around area 13, and the vertical height of the dunes can help you reach high above, say to hit him in the face, or the wings, or the tail. He'll also drag you eventually to areas 5 and 4, which is a really high up area that also has more boulders to drop, as well as the nest itself, where we have the reverb of lightning making those blasts bigger, and some useful stuff like the grounding stones and another boulder to pull down. But we'll talk about all that kind of stuff after. Let's now cover the mechanics of Rey Dau to be aware of. Now, he has a wide range of attacks, and there's 2 phases to this fight. There's the non-enrage, and there's enrage. So at the start, he won't be enraged obviously, and he'll be doing a variety of stuff, like this horn slam, slamming the horns down into the target's location briefly. To avoid that, just go under or behind him, but then with the wing swipe combo, he'll pick the target where you're standing and slam a wing into it. Again, you can avoid that by moving under the legs since the attack is in front of him, then move back to the head or tail for maintaining DPS. Speaking of the tail, he has a few different tail attacks, like say the slam. If you stand behind Rey for a brief period, he'll very likely slam the tail down. This is great because it has good recovery time to it, so if you bait it intentionally and quickly move to the head or somewhere, you can get some free DPS. Alternative to that is the tail drag, where he essentially does a 180 slow spin with the tail being dragged on the floor. It's kind of a classic flying wyvern move that. So just roll through it or go with the spin to avoid the damage entirely. Now, one of the iconic moves that we're going to see for Rey Dau is the wing drags, where he jumps back up into the air and then turns to drag a wing down in a line. This is actually quite easy to avoid by running sideways or evading to the side. He'll also do this on the ground at times, but the more he does this, the more something happens, as we'll talk about. He'll also do an aerial flip slam instead. He'll leap back away from you, then turn to fly upside down to then crash down by slamming his wing on the location. This will be right where you're standing as he's going to slam it, not where you were when he started the flip. So just be ready to late roll or even counter as he's about to slam down. During this, he will also start to use some lightning blasts, and it gets heavier as you go. The first non-enrage first lightning blast is not so bad. There's one where he just kind of charges the horns up and they begin to point forward as a clear tell he's using lightning at this time. For this, he can just do a little thrust with his charged horns, which will build up Thunderblight and a stun, so you're definitely going to be careful of that. Simply evade to the side and head back in to DPS the head during its recovery on that attack. But again, lightning attacks are going to build up Thunderblight, so manage it by eating null berries. Also be aware though, as the fight progresses, he seems to hold more and more thunder within him. The more lightning based attacks he uses, the more it kind of charges him. That means on the next lightning blast after the first one, it becomes more potent. Now he'll start to use ranged attacks where he blasts you multiple times slowly in a row. Again, you can just avoid this by keeping moving though. It's at your last location as he's firing it. But let's talk about that crystalline armor. As Rey fights, you'll notice that areas become quite blue, covered in this unique crystal. This builds up more and more as he charges more lightning into the attacks. So say after enough wing drags, the wings will get the strong blue covering it, or say the tail and so on. These can actually be targeted for bonus damage and even broken off him. The crystal seems to hold the lightning charge within it, so take the wing. When crystal is over it, it will cause little thunder explosions on the impacts. So it is worth breaking the crystal if you want to minimize the danger of those attacks. One thing I did notice though is that the recovery time after using one of these crystal enhanced attacks seems to be longer. It's like they're encouraging you, say after a crystal wing slam, to actually land some damage on that crystal wing in the hopes of actually breaking it. But that's kind of the basic version of Rey Dau. It's when he enrages that things get more dangerous. Rey will roar again mid-fight, and that will enter the enrage. The tail swipes will now become, say, multiple hit combos at times, the wing slams becoming more deadly, the horn thrust faster and harder hitting, the classic enrage stuff. However, the big change you're going to notice is the lightning blasts in particular. He now begins to supercharge these single blasts that will clean out your health bar. He can do that lightning blast from the ground or the air, the ground when even pushing him back with the force of the impact. When he's doing these, there's lots of different tells. He has an organ that's running down the side of his neck that lights up, and these little glowing crystal spikes come out of him. After that, lightning runs down the length of his spine down his neck, and the very air around him begins to glow in a bright blue. The horns will fully close into a single point, and then he will blast after a delay in a huge AoE at his target location. As scary as this is, the recovery time after this big lightning blast is really long, the longest of everything that he has. So if you can manage to stay near enough to him, avoid the blast, you'll actually be close enough to run in for a few seconds of free DPS to his head or otherwise. Just be careful about being too near his front or side during the ground version. The AoE of that is huge right in front of him. So my advice is to get behind his legs at least, then rush back into the head for the free DPS. But yeah, when Rey is really low, he eventually leads you to his nest, where things get much more dangerous. The nest is made of that same crystal that builds up over his body, which means it holds the lightning power and spreads it like the stuff on his body. So the lightning blast locations, it now has a much wider reach around its impact. Fortunately, there are some unique pod items in the nest to help. These are called grounding stones and can be fired into the crystals to nullify their charge. There's also a rock to pull down onto Rey in the back corner, stunning him for a while, but otherwise, I think it's a wide enough area that's not too tight. It's just obviously extra dangerous because of the extra impact of the lightning. So that's the general list of his moves and tells though. Here's my overall advice for the fight. I think you should target his head as much as possible, if not the tail, and then after that, any crystal parts like the wings when those are active. The head breaking the horn could be relevant, but building up KO damage if you can to knock him down will help the fight become much more manageable. I also find that the head is the best punish window during those recovery animations after a variety of the bigger attacks. In general, I find that dodging sideways for most of the attacks works great, but I want to be under or behind him for anything lightning related. I do try to bait the tail slam by standing behind him when he's active, because that leaves his head leaning low and exposed during the recovery animation. And obviously, there's the really long recovery time after enraged lightning blasts, leaving him exposed. I also strongly recommend the use of mount attacks by jumping from the seikret or terrain regularly and using an aerial attack. This builds up mount damage, which will eventually trigger a mount. While mounted, you can create wounds on his body by doing 2 to 3 heavy attacks in the same place with the dagger, or many light dagger stabs. But when you're done, target the head with a weapon attack finisher, and that'll bring him down as a fantastic way to intentionally interrupt, say, enrage periods. In general too, I recommend spamming your wound breaks. As soon as they're available, focus mode attack them if that's relevant for your weapon, or just use basic damage either way. It is just great damage to break them and seems to cause mini staggers. Just be aware though that wounds created on his open horns during the enraged lightning mode are only vulnerable during that time. So you might find that you've built up a bunch of them and then they're suddenly exposed during certain moments. So be sure to focus mode attack those in those brief moments that you can. If you want to make the fight as easy as possible though, like I said, bring lure pods. You can lure Rey to the cave areas where say you'd find chatacabra usually. There's at least 3 rocks that you can pull down from the ceiling here for multiple easy knockdowns back to back for easy DPS. This gives you a great chance to break the horns or cut the tail, that kind of thing. As well as the fact that he will bring you to high up areas like 5 and 4 where there are more options for pulling down rocks. And he's also vulnerable to environment vine traps, like in the grassy area with the tree, as another option. The last piece of advice I'd give you though, and something that really helped me in the fight, but works for all of Wilds, is the new knockdown recovery option. In Rise, we could use a wire bug to basically drag ourselves back up off the floor, but in Wilds that's gone. So here, if you get hit and knocked down, don't panic. Call your seikret while you're knocked down. It will come running over and basically pick you up off the floor, immediately moving you from that bad location. This can let you recover with less risk, get yourself out of there, and heal while moving. So I think that's really helpful. But that's the fight and my advice for you. I think Rey Dau's design and the sounds in particular are amazing. I think the crystalline armor not only is a fun mechanic for breaking and satisfying in that way, but god does it look cool. Especially with the nest and the crystal there. I just love the idea that nests enhance the mechanics of a monster, and I hope to see more of that in the other locales. I think it's a fantastic monster though that fits perfectly into the lineup. It's like the flying wyvern version of a Zinogre, which by the way is one of my favourite monsters. So I really like Rey Dau, and he has me very excited for the rest of the monsters too. I hope this overview helps you beat him, but if you guys have any extra tips for others, then let us know in the comments. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.